All right, let's get right into it. We all think we know the story of 90s West Coast rap, right? But what if I told you the whole way we think about it, as a timeline, a series of events, is completely wrong? Today, we're going to look at it through a wild new lens, a framework that shows it wasn't a story at all, it was something else entirely. So just think about this for a second. What if the music, the money, the beefs, the tragedies, what if all of that wasn't just one thing happening after another? What if it was a closed system, a loop that was constantly feeding on itself, creating its own reality as it went? And the perfect metaphor for this is an ancient one, the Ouroboros. You've seen it, right? The snake eating its own tail. It's the ultimate symbol of a self-contained cycle. It creates itself, it consumes itself, and then it's reborn from itself. And believe me, it is the absolute key to unlocking how Defunct literally wrote its own world into existence. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll define what this West Coast Ouroboros even is. Then we'll map out the forces that made it spin. We'll look at the key players, not as people, but as archetypes. We'll get into the paradox that fueled the whole thing, watch the loop in motion, and finally see how it all reset for a new generation. Okay, first step, the West Coast Ouroboros. The most important thing to get your head around is that this wasn't just a music scene. No way. It was a self-contained world, a total feedback loop, where what was real and what was art just completely blurred together.
And this, right here, is the magic trick. The music, the thing the system produced, wasn't just a reflection of life in Compton or Long Beach. It became the new input. The streets started performing the art, which then inspired more art, and boom, you have this incredibly powerful self-feeding cycle.
So you're probably asking, how does a loop like this even get started? What were the conditions? Let's actually map out the forces that gave birth to this completely unique cultural system.
Well, it all started with a really clear cause and a powerful effect. On one side, you have the intense pressure cooker of 1980s LA, especially with aggressive police tactics like Operation Hammer. The result? The birth of what they called reality rap. NWA wasn't trying to make pop hits. They were sending up a flare, a raw journalistic signal from a community under siege.
But then, the system fed back on itself. The FBI sends a warning letter about "fuck that police," thinking they can shut it down. Instead, they turn NWA from a local group into national anti-heroes overnight. They poured gasoline on the fire. The more the establishment pushed back, the more authentic and powerful the music became, feeding that energy right back into the loop.
Now, what's really fascinating is how many different kinds of forces were at play here. You had total wildcards, these random shocks like the Rodney King verdict that just ripped a hole in the culture. You had these hidden rules of gang politics that nobody on the outside understood. Then you had the obvious stuff, the platinum plaques for the Chronic that proved, hey, this thing works. And all the while, you had this slow-moving, predictable disaster of mass incarceration, which ironically was being fed by the very lifestyle the music was selling.
Okay, so we've mapped the system. Now let's talk about the key players. But we're not going to view them as just artists. Oh no. In this framework, they're archetypes. They're essential cogs in the machine, each with a very specific job to do. Let's start with the autonomous part. Dr. Dre, the visionary. Think of him as the system's creative engine room. He was a totally self-contained unit, driven by this relentless internal vision. He wasn't chasing a sound. He was building the sonic reality that everyone else would eventually live in. And this story, it tells you everything you need to know, 107 times, for one single bar. That's not just being a perfectionist, that's a creator who is completely obsessed with meeting an internal standard that has nothing to do with the outside world. That is the autonomous part in its purest form. Then you have the intrinsic part, Tupac Shakur, the spirit. If Dre was the engine, Tupac was the chaotic, fiery soul of the whole system. He literally was its central contradiction. The revolutionary son of Black Panther activists on one shoulder and the nihilistic death row thug on the other. That war inside of him is what made his art so electric. And while all that's happening in LA, you've got the adaptive part up in the Bay Area, E40, the survivor. While the LA scene was building this giant, top-down empire, E40 was playing a totally different game. He was building a decentralized, independent network that wasn't designed for total domination, but for one thing, survival. And his bizarre model was just genius. We're talking selling tapes straight out of the trunk of a car, owning his own masters from day one, talking directly to his fans, constantly inventing new slang to keep the culture fresh. He built a system that could band without breaking, a crucial alternative to the brittle empire being built down south. So we've got the map, we've got the players, but what was the fuel? What actually powered this whole thing? It was paradox. The unbelievable creative energy of that era came from the tension of trying to solve problems that were impossible to solve.
And the biggest paradox of all was keeping it real. Think about it. To be authentic, you had to actually live that life. But to be successful, you had to package that life and sell it to millions. So what do? Well, Defunct was the answer. It created this hyper-real, almost simulated version of the West Coast, smooth, cinematic, and perfectly designed to be consumed by anyone, anywhere.
All right, enough with the theory. Let's put this loop in motion. Let's see how this whole system of archetypes, forces, and paradoxes actually played out in the real world. The dramatic rise, the incredible peak, and the tragic collapse of the Defunct era.
The timeline tells the whole story of the loop. 1988, you get the initial spark with Straight Outta Compton. Then in 92, after the riots, the system adapts and processes that trauma into art with The Chronic. But by 96, with Tupac's murder, the system just can't handle the pressure and it collapses. And then in 2000, you get the Up in Smoke tour, which is like the ghost of the system taking a victory lap, solidifying its own myth.
So what actually caused that collapse? It was the East versus West rivalry. It started out as healthy, creative friction, but it spiraled into something purely destructive. In our metaphor, the Ouroboros bit down on its own tail, and it bit way too hard. It severed its own head. The very energy that created the system is what ultimately destroyed it.
But here's the thing about a loop. The end is never really the end. It's a recursion. The system didn't just die. It rebooted. All that energy, all that history, it got reabsorbed and used to create the next thing.
And this slide explains everything. You had two models. The Death Row Cathedral, centralized, powerful but rigid and brittle, it shattered under pressure. But the Bay Area is bizarre, decentralized, flexible, adaptive. It survived the chaos. It survived and thrived, and it actually gave us the blueprint for what independent music would become.
So where did all that energy go? Who is the ultimate recursion of this entire loop? You're looking at him, Kendrick Lamar. He is the synthesis of the whole damn thing. He's got the underground consciousness, he's got the inner conflict of Tupac, and he's got the sonic perfectionism of Dr. Dre. He is, in his own words, the rose that grew from the concrete of this entire chaotic history. He even closes the loop by interviewing a ghost of Tupac on his album. It's incredible.
So the big takeaway is this. The Ouroboros teaches us that powerful cultural movements don't just end, they transform. They feed on their own stories, their own myths, even their own destruction to create what comes next. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. What parts of our culture, right now, are secretly eating their own tail to create the art of tomorrow?